Okay. Josephus, known as Flavius Josephus, and Josephus ben Mattatao, and or Mattate, and depending on how you pronounce it, and that's because his father's name is Matthias, supposedly. And by the way, just starting out right here, if you're doing a book report, this probably isn't going to be the best information for you, although it will be the true information for you. I'm just going to break it down real quick instead of getting all into it, but they have found now that this is a forgery. And that actually, what made it so difficult for them to find out that it was a forgery was they knew there was a few pieces in it that were a forgery. And there was a statement he gave in there of his own account of a war and things that had happened that could not be true. And so that led people to think about it and try to go through it. And they're trying to figure out where it got embellished and where it didn't and so on there. And then they come to find out that it was blocked out real bad and that it had actually been changed much later than the time that they say that he had written it. And like in 135, there's a change. There's a change at 160, and there's a change at about 310. And doesn't that sound like the Council of Nicaea time right there? We're really edging all the way up into there that this thing gets manipulated. And one of his works is attributed to 135, to the year 135, which is odd because he supposedly, in his own autobiography that he wrote, was from 37 to the year 100, and he died on a holiday. So, boy, isn't that perfect? He just lived to exactly the 100 date. Well, what can we find out about him? Because you see the picture here, and he's always shown as wearing a Persian type turban, and which really wasn't the style, by the way, of the Hebrews and of his supposed father. Was one other thing that always stood out, but the Hebrews didn't want to say anything because it gave them a little bit of stature. The problem is that this man wrote the history of the war, of how they all got killed off. So this was almost like a taboo subject. It'd be like, I don't know, some Jewish person reading Mein Kampf right now or something. It just really wouldn't fit too good. But anyhow, he's got a lot of works attributed to him. A lot of works. And what's crazy about that, too, is that normal Jewish scholars and stuff, they don't have that many works attributed to him at all. Little small things that, if anything, or if you're lucky, that guy got his little thing put in the Bible, and stuff. So, and it's kind of like the old saints of old, like where the saints nowadays have to do something and have some miracles really happen in their life, and then they can be sainted. Back then, you could get your book in the Bible, but you have to have had something incredible have happened to you enough to where it works. And so we start looking through this, and strangely, you find that he didn't look like this. He didn't look like this at all. He actually looked very much not like this. Something totally different than what you would think any Hebrew or Jew or Persian would look like. So let's look at some of these other pictures here of him and see what we've got. That's a book. But he always looks like this. He's got that long Persian face. You're seeing these, all these pictures. This is the way he looks, right? A lot of times he's got that concern in his eyes like that vindictive a little bit look. Other times it's maybe a little bit more concerned like that. It's just variations on the theme of how they made it look. But he's got that definite kind of look in his eye, and he's all Persianed out, cocked his head a little bit, and kind of looking at you like, right? Big beard. Well, would it surprise you to know that they have figured out now that it's really, and people have known this for years, but the actual way that this man looked was this. You can see this face in here a bunch of times, but this. This all of a sudden becomes the face of the guy that writes the book. That's strange, isn't it? Doesn't that? Let's see if I can get that centered real good for you. Doesn't that look strange there? That's definitely not a Jewish person, is it? That's a Roman person with that Roman hook nose right there. Yeah, and that was strange. And then the strangest thing was they found copies of this same statue, and it said that it was the Emperor Titus. And they're like, what? And yeah, they found like this statue that looks exactly like that other one, but this one said that it was Titus. And then they find works signed by him as Emperor Josephus Titus. Titus Josephus Flavius. And so you can see that nowadays they're even just putting his face on the art because people have known this for a long time, and they're just going, okay, so he still wrote about Christ, right? Well, no. No, actually, he didn't. Whoever his scribe was did. Dadunch. But this is really an odd account that he's got here. He tells you things like, now my father was nobility, he was righteousness, he had a great reputation in Jerusalem, the greatest city that they have, and that man doesn't exist either, and they can't find him. And strangely, everybody always, they say, let me pop this up for you real quick. Can I get that centered and thick? That's pretty good. The yellow right there. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it's lawful to call him a man. For he is a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men, blah, blah, blah. He drew over to him both many Jews and the Gentiles. He was Christ. And they put in the after that. And when Pilate, the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these, and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And this always concerned people reading this too, because whenever you count up Jesus' works, if you said 20, you'd be exaggerating, and you shouldn't exaggerate whenever you're trying to write about somebody who's really supposed to be divinity. You should try to be as accurate as possible, and he's supposed to be a very accurate historian. And yet, in this weird portion right here, he doesn't even say 20. He doesn't say 50, and 100 would have been like, look at me going way crazy. 100. Like, man, there's a bunch of things, right? And he doesn't even go 1,000, does he? No, he goes 10,000. And then they try to cover it up. The first thoughts were, oh, he was just taken by the Lord. And he goes, well, he's lying for Christ? This became a big problem for the church. So anybody that questioned it, they killed him and skinned him alive and stuff. Like they did everybody back then. So what's odd is what it actually said in the original, believe it or not, and you can believe it because they found it now, is, let me see if I can get that centered. where it says he was Christ, which appears in that text I just showed you. There's manuscript was written as he was believed to be Christ in the original version that they have found now in the Greek and Syriac versions both. It doesn't say what I just told you. Whenever it gets to the point it says, oh, he was Christ, it says he was believed to be the Christ. That people believed that he was the Christ. It's a pretty big difference on what he would say. All right? But that's not even the worst part of it. The worst part of it is, well, let's go through a little bit more of this, but this is him. This is him right here. And so you're wondering, that's a Roman dude. Exactly right, that's a Roman dude. And here he is, Josephus, the Essential Writings. And how they know that it's actually Emperor Titus. See, now he's Josephus and his Essential Writings, and who the hell is this? This is not some Persian dude. No, it's definitely not, people. It's definitely not. And now there's been books out that are like this right here, Josephus and the Jesus Forgery. I don't know if you've seen this out. Some people have. But it breaks it down for you pretty good. And what it tells you is that Josephus is actually just the scribes of Titus. And that he was hired to write all this stuff. By the way, they haven't found anything that he's ever written in Hebrew. Not a single scratch. His name, nothing whatsoever. It's all written in Greek. It's all written in Greek. In fact, they found some of his original things and they're like, oh boy. And then they said, oh boy. And then the Greek scribes transcribed it. Here's a piece of it right here. And what they come to find out is, you see that gap right there? And you see that gap right there? This is basically the story, leaving out the gap of what's said during those parts. And here he is telling them what to do. And there's that scribble on the side of it. This was the scribe's writing. That was his. It's Greek, but it's real telling too, because it tells him to actually say that it's someone who thought of as the Christ. Anoxwai. So that comes out to be just real strange. Worse than that, people, it frames him slightly, and then people started looking into it. Now what they found out is that whenever he has his work on the Jewish wars and antiquities of the Jews, that it's actually just telling of Titus's attack on Jerusalem and how he goes through from Galilee to outside the city and storms the place. I've got a whole nother video I've got to do of this on a separate thing. But what actually happens is they storm the place, they trap them inside the middle of the city, and like the Alamo, they keep them trapped and they starve them out. And at the end of everything, whenever they run in, they've already killed themselves. And during the story of all this, it basically follows exactly Jesus's ministry. Whenever Titus goes and he is at Galilee, and Jesus is at Galilee. Jesus finds people, makes fishers of men, casts the boat on the right side of the water, and pulls people up. In Titus Flavian story written by Josephus, they kill all the people, catch them in the boats, and then they, on the right side of the boat, pull them up with fish hooks, saying that they're catching men. there's 4 or 5 correlations that lead you to the city. Pardon me. Each one is exactly the same as Jesus. Jesus will say something, Titus will say something, and they match up. One of which is the whole fear not thing whenever Jesus is there before they go to the city, and Titus tells his own troops, fear not, the same situation. I should pull this up for you, but I'm just going to go ahead and go through this with you. So, at this great Jewish war, they rent down the temple and they took it all the way down. And you know when Jesus told you that whenever the end of the world comes, how there won't be any stone standing and all that bullshit. And so people have been waiting forever for it. Well, here, amazingly, what the truth is that this is actually it. People don't catch it. Or they try to act like it's for them. And whenever he's at the Mount of Olives and he secretly pulls the disciples aside, or they pull him aside and they ask him, what are the signs, Lord, that all this is going to happen? When are the signs? And he goes, verily I tell you, some of you here will be here alive during its lifetime. Will happen in a generation. And da-da-da. What does this mean? Well, what do you think that means? Do you think that 2017 years later it's talking to you, or do you think he's talking to the disciples and telling them that in their generation it's going to happen? So this Jewish revolt here happens from the year 66 in the 6th month on the 6th day. Isn't that telling? And it's all been written in the Bible to be code for when the Hebrews were supposed to attack back, and they gave themselves a generation to give themselves enough children to make enough to really go fight against them. And then they called everybody home to try to help them out, and they expected Jesus and a white horse to show up, or their Messiah, Emmanuel. His name never was Jesus. If you'll look in the thing that everybody goes, look, here's Jesus, it says his name's Emmanuel. Of course, this is when they're worshiping the Canaanite god El, and so his name is Emmanuel. Of course, they never quit worshiping El, because the Elohim, or the gods, angels, named Gabriel, Nathaniel, Elijah. Yeah, there's a lot of El. The house of God is Bethel, where Beth is a house, and the name of God is El. Yeah, Ezekiel. It gets real bad, doesn't it? The L thing. Let's just, if you want to see the white elephant that's been in the Bible, look that up. I've got one on that, and it'll tell you more about El. Or look up the one I did on Saturn, or Kronos, or El himself, or Canaanite deities, or I've got this information and a few others, but not really pumped all the way out there. But what happens here is that whenever Rome does come and destroy this, there's a few odd things. Rome destroys. As they come in, they're talking about where to put their big ramparts at. Where do they put their towers at? At this point in the gospel, Jesus says, if you're going to build a tower, do we not, choose the wood first and figure things out? And why would he throw out, the hell is that all about? If you'll read it in Scripture, sure enough, goes along with it. Well, Josephus tells another story too, that while they were starving him out, he said there was a lady named Mary who had her only son named Yeshua, and that she sacrificed him, and they would cannibalistically eat him as the very last Passover meal that they had. So this is Passover of Jesus dying to Passover now, exactly 40 years to the generation of an olive tree, and 40 years is a generation in the Bible, exactly, all the way back to King Nimrod, who was 40 whenever he died. And they ate him. At this point in the scripture, though, this is right before the day before they all get killed, the day before Passover, and Jesus is with his disciples having what's known as the Last Supper, where he tells them to eat of my flesh and drink of my blood. And I'm sure you've always thought that's just weird. Isn't that just weird how he'd want you to like cannibalistically do something weird? That's just messed up. To me, you had Jesus there just like, wow, and then all of a sudden that was said, and it was really a red flag. And then I went back through it, and he actually tells, and I missed it the first time totally. When I was a little kid, he says, if you don't hate your parents, then you can't follow him. And he also says at one time, people that don't believe him, bring him before them, and he wants them killed right in front of them. And I'm like, well, that was very different than turn the other cheek, but okay, I don't know. So what are all those statements come from? Well, that comes from Titus also. Yeah, it all comes from him. And the whole idea of him coming in and kicking in the moneylenders was him coming in and doing the thing and telling them that they're, and smoking them out, basically, and then killing them all off. And then it looks like here that they're all killing them all off, but the truth of the matter be known, and they tell you that whenever they had them trapped inside the city, whenever they finally busted in the city on Passover Day, that they had already all killed themselves, that people had killed each other, and some people had took it upon themselves to kill all the people before they got put into slavery again, including the children and such. And apparently the last guy fell on a sword or drank poison because there was nobody left alive. Nobody. But they had let some of them skip out, and they chased after them, and they took them all the way to the plains of Masada and killed them off there. Well, now Jesus said that the coming of man, their second coming of man, was going to be in 40 years, a generation of olive tree. But there's supposed to be 7 years of trials and tribulations and everything. Well, 66 AD to 73 AD is 7 years, and there were trials and tribulations because in 66 was when the Jews revolted and kicked against them and killed all the Romans in a sneak attack. Ha 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 ha. And then 73 is when they came back and killed all the Jews. And Titus was said as saying, I will give them the Armageddon they so desperately deserved and wanted. And so you wonder when Armageddon's going to come, and everybody's waiting for Armageddon, and that's because you're part of a doomsday cult that tries to get you by fear to feed their God to believe that it's all going to come to an end real quick. And people have been waiting for 2,000 years for some type of sign, and everybody keeps, oh my God, I saw a tsunami, and there was a shooting star. And the reality of the matter is, Jesus didn't lie. In 40 years, look it up, Mount of Olives. And in 40 years, it was going to happen, and in 40 years it did. Well, was he some super prophet? No. Both those instances were written by Titus. It's all been written by them. Because after they grabbed the Jews, they took everything they got. Look, they're grabbing it all right there in that picture. And they took everything they had, including every single Torah scroll there was, and they manipulated it. And even the Gnostic things that we find, those Gnostic things that we find, are actually them already working on it with the Greeks. And what's funny is all of those lost books of the Bible, and they go, oh, that was Gnostics making up shit. No, those were the real books of the Bible, and they had to tear that apart to make the story worthy. Because the real story is that they ended up worshiping El and at the wrong end of the stick, and everybody knows it. If that's the end of it, because that was the Canaanite god. So they just ended up sucking it into the Canaanite god and then called him Yahweh. So they changed it to Lord Yahweh, Lord Yahweh, Lord Yahweh. Well, I'll tell you, everywhere that it says Lord, that word is Baal. And they do worship a couple of different gods through the middle of this, although it's looked at as being, every time that God talks to them, it's Yahweh. It's not. I've already figured that out too. Got a video about it. Want to hear it? Hit go. But yeah, Josephus. Josephus the Roman general that came and killed them all, and then deified it. Why would they do something like that? Well, what the weirdest thing that everybody should be asking is, why would Rome, the biggest power in the world, kill off these nomadic tent people's stupid religion, and then 300 years later turn around and go, oh man, that was God, and then drop their whole Olympic pantheon for it? Well, they didn't do that. If you look through time, everybody in their pantheon was from people that were conquered around them or deities they had. Kronos was a Phoenician. That's Saturn. Greeks and Romans, they attached. It's nothing new. They have Isis statues and so on. And in fact, the current statue for Mary in there is actually a statue of Isis. And somebody had found that they had put another piece of block onto there. They pulled that piece of block off because it became loose, and it said Isis behind it. How about that? Look it up. It's the statue, and they left it like that. It's the statue that where she's wearing black. It's all made out of obsidian. Look up Isis statue, maybe Roman Isis statue, and it'll show you this one where she's black, wearing the stuff, and they go, "That's Mary, and she's in black because of Jesus," and they go, "No, no, that's Isis." Actually, look at the bottom of it. What does it say? And to this day, people take pictures of that and say that it's Mary, and they just chop off her feet and take off that Isis word. I've even seen where they CGI'd out the Isis and put on Mary before in a ad. So anyhow, people, that's the reality of that. And Armageddon's already happened, and the world's not going to blow up. And actually, all this is just bullshit and rubbish and stuff that we've been taught all this time. And yeah, look at some of my other videos, and it'll wake you up to what's really happening. And maybe mankind can come up out of this blur we've been in ever since these tent people try to make us believe something that really isn't true at all.